The floorboards creaked under her boots. Every sound in that silent ranch house felt like thunder to her ears. The lantern burned low, throwing shadows against the wall, and she prayed the little girl didn't stir. She couldn't face her eyes. Again, not after what she was about to do. Her bag was light, too light. Just a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a spare shirt, a knife she always kept tucked against her thigh. She didn't need more. She didn't plan on needing more. The plan was simple. Slip away before dawn, cut across the ridge, and vanish into the wide, unforgiving desert. Alone again. Always alone. Her hand was on the door latch when she heard it. A soft shuffle. A breath. She froze. Then dash warmth. A small hand slipped into hers. Fragile, trembling, but gripping tight like it was the only anchor left in the world. Turned. And there she was. The little girl's hair was tangled from sleep, her cheeks wet with tears. Her nightdress hung loose, thin against the chill. Her eyes, wide and wet, glistened in the lantern light. "Please," the girl whispered, voice cracking. "Please don't let us be alone again." Her throat tightened. God help her. She should have pulled her hand free. She should have. But she didn't. She couldn't. She'd come to this house months ago, with nothing but dust in her pockets and ghosts trailing her footsteps. The father had let her stay out of necessity more than kindness. The ranch needed hands, and he couldn't. Manage both cattle and child after the fever had taken his wife. But she was never meant to stay. She'd promised herself that from the start. She was no wife, no mother, no saint come to heal broken hearts. She was a woman who had lost too much already. A woman who carried the kind of grief that turned people to stone. And yet this child had found the cracks in her armor. She looked down at that tiny hand clutching hers, and for a heartbeat she wanted to stay. She wanted to believe she could belong, but belonging came with a cost. And she'd buried enough to know the cost was too high. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. A coyote yipped far out on the plain, answered by another in the distance. The desert was calling her name, same as it always had. Her breath came heavy. She forced herself to kneel, leveling her eyes with the girl's. "You don't need me," she whispered. "You've got your pa. He's strong enough, braver than I'll ever be." The girl shook her head, tears dripping from her lashes. "He don't smile no more. Not since Mama," her voice broke. "You make him smile sometimes. You make me feel safe." The words cut deeper than any blade. Safe. The last person who had ever said that to her was long buried under red dirt. She wanted to answer, wanted to promise, but the words lodged in her chest. Instead, she reached up and brushed a tangle of hair from the girl's face. The child leaned into her touch like she'd been starved of it. Maybe she had. Her resolve faltered. The scrape of boots on the porch made her stiffen. The door banged once, twice. Heavy fists. Her heart leapt. She pulled the girl against her and blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. "Stay quiet," she breathed. The little girl nodded, burying her face in her skirts. Another pounding knock. Then a voice, deep and gruff. "Reynolds, open up. We know you're in there." The father, the child's pa, he must still be out in the barn. That meant whoever was at the door wasn't friend. She held her breath, every nerve on edge. "You got 2 days." The voice barked. 2 days to pay what you owe. Otherwise, you'll be left with nothing but ashes. A spit on the porch. Then boots retreating into the dust. The night swallowed them. Her pulse hammered. The girl whimpered softly, and she stroked her back. "It's all right," she whispered, though it wasn't. Not by a long shot. When the father finally came in, sweat streaked with dirt on his brow, she was still clutching the child tight. He stopped short, eyes flicking from her to the shuttered windows. They come again? He asked. She nodded. 2 days. His jaw worked, a muscle ticking. Then we'll be ready. The girl reached for him, and he lifted her into his arms. His face softened for a fleeting second as he kissed the top of her head. Then his eyes found hers. Thought you'd be gone by now, he said flatly. She stiffened, heat rising to her cheeks. I was. And? She glanced at the girl in his arms, clinging to his neck, but peeking at her through damp lashes. She asked me to stay, she said quietly. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy as stone. Then he turned away. Suit yourself. He carried the child back toward her room, boots thudding softly against the boards. She stood alone in the dark, heart torn clean in two. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every moan of the wind felt like a warning. The ranch was hanging by a thread. 2 days, 2 days, until the men outside came back to collect their due or burn it all down. She'd wanted to leave to save herself. But now, with the child's small hand burned into her memory, she knew running wouldn't be so simple. The desert had always been her refuge. But tonight, it felt like a grave waiting to swallow her whole. And for the first time in years, she wasn't. Sure if she could face it at dawn, the rooster crowed. The smell of smoke from the hearth drifted through the air. She rose, weary, and stepped outside. The land stretched endless before her, golden grass waving, mountains jagged against the pale sky, dust shimmering in the morning light. Beautiful. Brutal. Behind her, the sound of laughter. She turned. The little girl, hair still tangled, was chasing a chicken across the yard. Barefoot and squealing with joy, her chest ached at the sight. The sound of a child's laughter was something she'd once thought she'd never hear again. Not after the fever, not after the graves, and yet here it was, ringing like a bell through the morning air. The father appeared, tools in hand, and for the first time in weeks, the faintest ghost of a smile touched his lips as he watched his daughter. The woman stood still, caught between two worlds. One where she left now, before it was too late. Another where she stayed and risked her heart all over again. The girl noticed her and ran over, slipping her small hand into hers once more. Don't go, she whispered. Not today. Then God help her, she didn't pull away. But as the sun rose higher, a shadow cut across the land. Riders on the horizon, black against the golden light. They were coming back sooner than anyone expected. And this time, they wouldn't just knock. The riders came fast. Dust kicked up from the plains, glinting in the early morning sun like smoke from a fire. Their silhouettes grew sharper as they approached, hats low, rifles slung across their backs, the swagger of men who believed this world belonged to them. She stood at the porch, her hand tightening around the doorframe. The father, Reynolds, was already striding across the yard, jaw set, shovel still in hand from the morning's work. He didn't even pause to wipe the dirt from his brow. He was a man who'd stared down too many storms to cower now. The little girl peeked from behind the woman's skirts, her fingers twisting in the fabric. Get inside, Reynolds barked without looking back. The woman didn't move. I said, inside. But she stayed where she was, her eyes locked on the 5 riders pulling up to the gate. The one in front lean, scar across his jaw, grin too sharp to be anything but trouble, tipped his hat as if he were calling on a neighbor for Sunday supper. Morning, Reynolds, he drawled. Fine little spread you've got here. Reynolds planted the shovel in the dirt and leaned on it, casual, though his shoulders were stiff as a drawn bow. You got my answer last night, he said. The outlaw's grin widened. That ain't how business works. 2 days, I told you. And yet, he swept his gaze toward the house, toward her standing on the porch, toward the child clutching her skirts. His grin sharpened. Looks to me like you might have found yourself some help. Her stomach turned. Reynolds' voice dropped low. Leave him out of this. The outlaw chuckled, shaking his head. Reckon I can't do that. See? Debts. Got a way of spreading. If the rancher can't pay, maybe the rancher's friends can. The woman's hand twitched toward the knife, hidden at her thigh. The outlaw saw it. His grin didn't falter. Fiery little thing, ain't she? Careful, Reynolds. You bringing in strays might cost you more than it saves. Reynolds' grip tightened on the shovel dot. The tension stretched thin as a wire. Finally, the outlaw spat. In the dirt? 2 days. Then this land's ours. Enjoy what little you got left. They wheeled their horses and thundered off, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in their wake. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound of hooves dot inside. The little girl's eyes were wide as saucers. Papa, she whispered, they'll hurt us. Reynolds crouched, putting a rough hand on her cheek. Not while I'm standing, they won't. But the woman saw the flicker of fear, buried behind his words. He was a strong man, but 5 rifles against 1 shovel wasn't. Strength. It was suicide. She crossed her arms. What do you owe them? He stiffened. Ain't your concern. Her voice hardened. It is if it means they'll burn this place down with a child inside. The girl's lip trembled. Reynolds shot her. A glance, jaw tightening, then finally exhaled through his nose. Feed Bill, he muttered. Winter was hard. Cattle near starved. Took credit I couldn't cover. She nodded slowly. She understood debt. She understood desperation. But that didn't change the fact that men like those didn't stop at cattle. They'd take the roof, the land, the girl anything they pleased. Then you'd better be ready to fight, she said. His eyes snapped to hers. For a moment, the fire that lived in his grief sparked. You think I can't? She held his stare. I think 1 man with a shovel against 5 guns is a death wish. And death don't feed little girls? The silence cut like glass. Finally, Reynolds looked away, shoulders sagging. She pressed on. If I'm staying, I fight too. He studied her for a long time, weighing something unspoken. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. Fine, but you follow. My lead? Her hand brushed the knife at her thigh. I've been fighting my whole damn life. That night, the ranch turned into a fortress. Reynolds boarded the windows. She filled every bucket in the house, in case fire came. The little girl fetched what she could carry, her small hands smudged with soot and dust, determined to help, though she could barely lift the pails. For the first time since she'd come, they moved like a family. Broken, makeshift, but bound. Together by necessity. In the stillness between hammer blows, she found herself watching Reynolds. The way his hands moved, steady and practiced. The way his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon, even in the dark. He carried his grief like armor, but under it, there was still a man who wanted to keep something alive. And the girl. God. The girl was everywhere, tugging at her skirts, asking questions, slipping her small hand into hers. Whenever the shadows grew too thick, she should have hated it, should have pulled away. But instead, each touch settled something restless inside her. 2 nights later, the storm broke. She heard them before she saw them, horses galloping hard, voices whooping in the night. The girl was already crying, clutching her arm. Stay down, she hissed, pushing the child behind a barrel in the kitchen. Reynolds was at the door, rifle in hand. He'd dug it out from under the floorboards earlier, oiled it, loaded it, kissed the barrel like a prayer. The riders came in a blaze of noise. Whoops, jeers, a bottle shattering against the barn wall. One fired into the air, the crack splitting. The night, Reynolds, the scarred one bellowed. Time's up. The woman crouched by the window, knife ready, pulse hammering. The firelight from their torches cast flickering shadows across the yard. Reynolds' voice was steady as steel. "This land ain't yours." A laugh, cold and sharp. "Not yet." A crack of a rifle split the air. Glass shattered beside her head, spraying shards across the floor. The girl screamed. She yanked the child close, heart pounding, the smell of gunpowder searing her lungs. Reynolds fired back. One rider tumbled from his horse, cursing as he hit the dirt. The yard erupted. Bullets whistled through the night. Horses reared. Men shouted. She dragged the girl deeper into the house, shoved her beneath the bed. "Stay there, no matter what." The girl's small hand clutched hers, desperate. "Don't leave me." Her throat tightened. "I'm not." She rose, knife in hand, and moved back toward the door. Reynolds was reloading, jaw set when she appeared at his side. "Thought I told you. Shut up and hand me a gun." His eyes burned into hers. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then he shoved a pistol into her palm. She wrapped her fingers around it, like it had always belonged there. The fight was chaos. She darted to the window, fired into the night. A rider spun and fell horse-bolting. Another torch landed near the barn, flames licking at the dry wood. "Barn!" she shouted. Reynolds cursed, sprinted out into the yard, shoveling dirt over the fire. Bullets sparked around him, one grazing his hat clean off. She covered him, firing until the pistol clicked empty. Then she was back to her knife, crouched low, waiting for the next man fool enough to breach the door. One did. He kicked the door wide, shotgun raised. She lunged, steel flashed. The blade sank deep into his arm. He howled, dropped the gun. She drove her shoulder into his chest, shoving him back into the night. Reynolds' rifle cracked, and the man crumpled. Her breath came ragged, chest heaving, blood hot on her hands. Hadn't fought like that in years. Not since no. She pushed the thought down. This wasn't then. This was now. And if she had to carve every outlaw to pieces to keep that child safe, she would not finally silence. The riders retreated, dragging their wounded, shouting curses into the night. The sound of hooves faded into the distance. The ranch was still standing. Barely Reynolds staggered back inside, face pale, arm bleeding from a deep gash. The girl crawled out from under the bed and ran to him, sobbing into his chest. He wrapped his good arm around her, kissed her hair. Then his eyes lifted to meet the woman's. For the first time, there was no suspicion there, no blame, only something raw, something unspoken. She wiped the blood from her knife, slid it back into its sheath. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "They'll be back," she said. Reynolds nodded grimly. "And so will we." That night, the girl wouldn't sleep unless she was between them. She clung to the woman's hand like it was a lifeline. Small fingers curled tight even in dreams. The woman stared at the ceiling, the sounds of gunfire still ringing in her ears. She had tried to leave, tried to keep herself unbound, untethered. But tonight, when the child begged her not to let go, she hadn't, and that scared her more than any outlaw ever could. The ranch smelled of smoke and iron by morning. The yard was a battlefield shattered gloss in the dirt. Blood splattered across the porch, a blackened patch near the barn where fire had almost claimed it. The little girl's laughter was gone. She sat silent on the steps, clutching her rag doll with both hands, watching her father's every move like she feared he might vanish if she blinked. Reynolds worked one-handed, his arm bound tight with cloth where the outlaw's bullet had grazed deep. His jaw was set, lips pressed thin, each hammer strike against the fence post echoing like gunfire. The woman watched him, knife in her belt, pistol heavy at her hip. She had not left his side since the night of the raid. She told herself it was for the child, but the truth was more tangled than she wanted to admit. The air between them was thick with things unsaid Dot by noon. Dust rose on the horizon again. This time it wasn't 5 men. It was closer to 15. Dot. The woman's stomach dropped. They brought the whole damn pack, she muttered. Reynolds squinted into the sun. His face was calm, but his knuckles whitened around the rifle stock. The girl's voice was a whisper. "Papa?" He crouched down, brushed her hair back gently. "Go on, darlin'. Inside. Stay low." Her eyes darted to the woman. "You too." The woman crouched to meet her gaze, forcing a small smile. "Not this time, sweetheart. This time I fight?" The girl shook her head, trembling. "You'll get hurt." She swallowed hard. "I already am, little one, but I'll fight anyway." The girl's small fingers tightened on hers. For a heartbeat, she thought she might break and run take the child, vanish into the wild where the outlaws couldn't follow. But then she looked at Reynolds, steady against the storm, and something inside her hardened. She wasn't running. Not anymore. The riders came like a swarm of locusts, circling the ranch with whoops and laughter. They carried rifles, pistols, ropes. A few dragged torches. Unlit but waiting Dot at their head was the scarred man again, his grin wider than ever. Well, he called out. Looks like Reynolds picked himself a wildcat." His eyes flicked toward her, sharp as blades. "You sure you want to die for a ranch that ain't yours, lady?" She raised her pistol, steady as stone. "You'll find out soon enough." The men laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was the sound of wolves circling prey. Reynolds lifted his rifle. "This land ain't yours to take." The scarred man spat in the dirt. "Ain't about land anymore, Reynolds. It's about makin' an example. You cross me, you don't get to walk away." The tension broke like glass. Gunfire roared. The world narrowed to smoke, blood and dust. The woman dropped behind a trough, firing fast and hard. Bullets tore splinters from the wood, dirt spraying her face. Her heart hammered, each breath sharp in her throat. She saw one outlaw drop, clutching his chest. Another fell from his horse, screaming as he hit the ground. Reynolds was a shadow at the barn door, rifle cracking, every shot deliberate. He fought like a man who knew he couldn't afford to miss, but there were too many. A torch arced through the air, landing in the hay pile near the barn. Flames leapt high, smoke curling black. "No!" The girl screamed from the window. The woman bolted, sprinting across open ground. Bullets whistled past her ears. She grabbed the burning torch, flung it away, stomped hard until the fire died. To Ash Dot a shot rang out too close, her arm seared with pain. She hit the dirt, blood slick on her sleeve. For a moment, the world tilted. Then she pushed up, teeth bared, and fired back. The man who shot her dropped, his hat flying as he hit the ground. She stumbled to cover, chest heaving, arm burning. Reynolds' voice cut through the chaos. "Inside! Get inside!" But she shook her head. "Not while you're out here." The fight stretched brutal and long. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Gunpowder choked the air. At one point, 2 riders broke through the fence, charging straight for the house. The woman met them head on. She fired once one dropped. The other lunged from his saddle, tackling her into the dirt. They rolled, his hands clawing for her throat. She shoved her knee up, knife flashing, and buried the blade in his side. Hot! Blood spilled across her hands. His eyes went wide, breath rattling. He collapsed beside her, dust rising in a crimson cloud. She staggered up, shaking, knife dripping. Through the haze, she saw the girl's face pressed to the window, pale with terror. By dusk, the yard was littered with bodies. The outlaws had fallen back, but their leader still sat tall in the saddle, watching. He tipped his hat, mocking. "This ain't over. We'll be back till every one of you's rotting." Then he wheeled his horse and rode, his men dragging, the wounded with them. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of dying fire and the rasp of their breathing. The woman's knees buckled. She pressed a hand to her bleeding arm, grit in her teeth, heart still pounding like a war drum. Reynolds limped to her side, blood on his temple, his rifle dangling loose. His eyes locked on hers. "You saved us," he said hoarsely. Closed. "I nearly got you all killed." He shook his head. "No, without you, we'd be dead already." The words hung between them, heavy, dangerous. Then a small voice cut through the silence. The girl ran out of the house, straight into her arms. She buried her face against her, trembling. "You came back," she whispered. "You didn't leave." "Me." The woman froze. Her arms hovered, trembling. Then slowly, carefully, she wrapped them around the child. Something broke inside her. Or maybe it healed Dot for the first time in years. She let herself hold someone like she'd never let go. That night, the house smelled of blood and smoke. Reynolds tended her wound with steady hands, his touch rough but careful. "You've done this before," he said quietly. Her eyes flicked to his. She didn't answer, but he saw it anyway. The ghosts in her eyes. The past she didn't speak. Who'd? "You lose?" he asked, voice softer than she'd ever heard. She swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened on the chair. "My boy," she whispered. The words burned like fire. Fever took him, took his pa too, left me with nothing but dirt and memories. Reynolds' eyes darkened, grief answering grief. He reached for her. Hand hesitated and set it over hers anyway. "I'm sorry." He murmured. Dot, her breath shook, but she didn't pull away. For a long moment they sat in silence. Just two broken souls, stitched together by loss and survival. Later, she lay awake beside the little girl, the child's small hand curled tight around her fingers even in sleep. She stared at the ceiling, smoke-stained and cracked. Every instinct screamed to run, to leave before the bond grew deeper, but she couldn't move. The girl's whisper from that first night echoed in her ears. "Please don't let us be alone again." And she realized, with a bone-deep certainty that terrified her, she wasn't fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to stay. The night broke heavy with silence. The prairie stretched wide, its grasses whispering secrets to the wind, and the stars above burned like cold fire. Sarah sat on the porch, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Inside, the little girl Mary slept curled against her brother's chest, their breathing soft, fragile. The house, once hollow with emptiness, now pulsed with life. But Sarah's heart was a battlefield. She had packed her bag hours ago. Inside lay her last loaf of bread, a worn Bible, a few scraps of fabric she meant to mend into something useful. She told herself she would slip away before dawn. She told herself this wasn't her home. These weren't her children, and she wasn't strong enough to stay. But then Mary's hand had gripped hers earlier that evening. "Please," the girl had whispered, eyes shimmering like a creek at dusk. "Don't let us be alone again." That plea cut deeper than any bullet. Sarah had run from plenty of things in her life: poverty, hunger, the hollow ache of abandonment. But this? Two children clinging to her as if she were the only fence keeping the wolves away. That was something different. Her eyes stung as she looked out across the plain. A lantern flickered weakly against the night, a moth circling it in desperate orbit. She thought of the men who had stalked her, the ones whose boots she still half expected to hear, crunching the gravel path. She thought of the sheriff who had turned his back, the townsfolk who whispered when she passed. She thought of the little girl's hand, trembling but unyielding. Her chest tightened. Maybe the wolves weren't just out there. Maybe they were inside her too: fear, shame, the voice that said she wasn't enough. The screen door creaked, stiffened, hand instinctively darting toward the pistol holstered at her side. But it was only Eli the boy, his dark hair tousled from sleep. He looked older than his years, the way children forced to carry burdens often did. "You're leaving," he said flatly. Her breath caught. "What makes you say that?" He crossed his arms, gaze steady. "You've been looking at the horizon all night, like you're already walking it. And the bag under your bed, I saw it." Sarah's throat worked, but no words came. Eli stepped. Closer, his jaw set, his voice quieter now. "If you go, she won't survive it. Mary, she's been holding on by threads. You think you'll break the chain by leaving, but you'll just be another person who dropped her hand." The words hit like a lash. She turned away, blinking against the heat in her eyes. "You don't know what I've been through," she whispered. "No," Eli said. "And you don't know what we've been through either. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we don't need to know every scar. Maybe we just need to stop running." His voice cracked on the last word. The boy, suddenly looking small again, shoulders trembling. Sarah reached out before she realized it, her hand resting awkwardly on his. For the first time, she wasn't the one holding on. Dawn crept slow over the prairie, the horizon blushing pink and gold. Sarah stood at the edge of the yard, her bag heavy in her hand. Every instinct screamed to keep walking, to fade into the vastness where no one expected anything from her. But then Mary stirred on the porch, barefoot, her hair tangled from sleep. She rubbed her eyes, saw Sarah, and without hesitation ran to her. The little girl's hand slipped into hers again, no words. Just that simple, powerful act. Sarah's fingers trembled. Her grip tightened. The bag slipped from her other hand, landing softly on the dirt. Life didn't miraculously fix itself after that. The ranch was still in disrepair. The wind still rattled the windows at night, and danger still lurked on the trails. There were days Sarah felt the old urge to flee rise in her chest like wildfire. But she stayed, because staying wasn't about ease. It was about choice. She learned to mend fences alongside Eli, to teach Mary letters by lamplight. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years, when the children argued over who had eaten the last biscuit. She even started singing again, her voice cracked with disuse, but filled with something new. Hope. And when the wolves came back, because of course they did, she didn't face them alone. Eli stood at her side, rifle steady. Mary clung to her skirt, whispering prayers. Together, they drove the darkness back. Weeks later, Sarah found herself standing in the small-town church. The preacher's voice droned faintly as the congregation shifted in their pews. Mary sat pressed against her side, Eli a solid presence. At her other shoulder, the townsfolk glanced their way, whispering as always. But Sarah didn't care. For the first time, she wasn't the outsider slipping quietly through life. She wasn't running anymore. She was rooted. She was needed. And when Mary reached for her hand once more, Sarah didn't hesitate. She held on, tight. The story doesn't end here, not really. The prairie still stretches wide. The storms still roll heavy, and wolves still stalk the edges of firelight. But Sarah's heart is no longer empty. She's no longer the woman who slips away before dawn. She's the woman who stayed. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing of all. So tell me, what would you have done? Walked away into the endless horizon, or stayed when two small hands begged you not to? Out here in the Wild West, sometimes the fiercest battles aren't fought with guns, but with the courage to hold on. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters just like hers did.